I don't want to scare anyone, but I'm going to give it to you straight about Jason.
Golden Spiral Media presents the Friday the 13th rewatch.
Jason, Mother is talking to you.
Join Corey and Nathan each week as they slash their way through campgrounds, woods, Manhattan, hell, and space as they discuss another installment in the Friday the 13th franchise.
Hey, wasn't that the road up for Camp Crystal Lake back there?
Send us your feedback at goldenspiralmedia.com/feedback. Like our Facebook page at facebook.com/rewatch podcast. And follow us on Twitter at rewatchpod.
Legend has it that Jason came back to get even. Every now and then, the murders just start up.
Today we're discussing Friday the 13th, Part 3, starring Gloria Charles, Rachel Howard, David Cattams, Dana Kimmel, Paul Kratka, Cherry Morgan, Catherine Parks, Jeffrey Rogers, and Larry Zerner, with Richard Brooker as Jason, directed again by Steve Miner. Welcome back to the Rewatch Podcast. I'm Corey, and I know how to do it, but how do we do it in a hammock?
And I'm Nathan. And is that all you're going to do this weekend? Smoke dope?
That's how I roll, baby.
You know, in hindsight, I should have picked a line from Shelley. Because he's the funniest in the whole film.
Yeah, he's got all the good lines, it's true.
He's got all the good lines. Welcome back, everyone, to our Friday the 13th rewatch. We're up to our third entry into the series, and I'm excited to talk about this because this one was made in 3D, wasn't it, Corey?
It certainly was. Not that we could see it in 3D. I don't know. I believe they've released it on Blu-ray in 3D, so you can have that experience at home if you want to. But no, I just watched this in regular old 2D on a DVD that I've had for many years.
It's a shame because it's clearly meant to be seen in 3D, isn't it? Clearly.
But before we get too far into it, I want to remind everybody that we are indeed part of the Golden Spiral Media Podcast Network. So send us your feedback on Friday the 13th or anything we're talking about here. Head over to goldenspiralmedia.com/feedback. Type a message or use the SpeakPipe widget to record your voice so we can play it back here on the show. You can also call 304-837-2278. Also head over to facebook.com/goldenspiralmedia or follow on Twitter at GSM Podcasts.
When we say this stuff, we mean it. Get involved. The show is always more fun when people get involved. You can actually have your voice on this podcast. You can tell us your experiences with Friday the 13th. When you saw it, did you like it? Do you think it's silly? Do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? Tell us what you think and get involved in the show because we actually want to hear from you, don't we?
Exactly. As much as you and I love coming here week by week, talking to each other about our experiences with this movie or the movie of the week, we'd love to hear what you guys think. It makes just a good contrast for the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as I said, get involved. All the details are there.
All right. So beginning at the beginning, shall we check out the trailer?
Let's do it. Let's roll the projector.
Weekends are a good time to escape to the woods. Unless the weekend begins with Friday the 13th. Because 13 is an unlucky number. But out here, so are 1 through 12. Because these are Jason's woods. And nobody leaves them alive. Friday the 13th, Part 3. Jason. You can't fight him. You can't stop him. And now, you can't even keep him on the screen. Friday the 13th, Part 3. When it comes to killing in Jason's woods, Jason will come to you. Friday the 13th, Part 3. A new dimension in terror. It will scare you. Count on it.
All right, welcome back. Friday the 13th opened in 1,079 theatres in 3D, as I said, and it actually took in $9,400,000 in its opening weekend, breaking the horror opening record held by the original Friday the 13th. Domestically, the film made a grand total of $36 million. So, as we've kind of mentioned before, a fairly good success once again for the franchise, and I think it's a fair thing to say that we're going to get more sequels, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this had a budget of $4 million, so you know, a squidge over $36 million in return, not half bad at all.
That's not including worldwide box office, and that's also not including like DVDs and supplemental kind of merchandise that the film kind of generated and stuff. So if you were a producer on Friday the 13th, you were kind of laughing all the way to the bank, weren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was huge. 3D. I mean, this is not 3D like we know it today. This was 3D back in the day, and I'm sure we're going to get more into the 3D as we get through the trivia here.
Now, something I actually kind of want to discuss as well is it was up against such films like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which opened on the same week. Rocky 3 was out as well in its 13th week, but the big, ginormous film that I suspect no one saw coming was E.T. E.T. was in its 11th week when it made $215 million. The following week, it actually, because in the first week it held, I think it was number 2 in the box office. The following week on August 27, it actually dropped to number 3, taking in $2.9 million, but was still up against E.T., Mad Max The Road Warrior was still there. The World According to Garp came out. That was in its 6th week of release. So it always kind of amazes me. I mean, we've done these kind of lists before, Corey, talking about box office release dates, but the quality of films during this period is just, I mean, you can't kind of better it, can you?
All those big films it was up against. I mean, we were talking about how sort of, you know, Halloween set the trend, and then Friday the 13th kind of went on its coattails, right? By this time, Part 3 coming out, there were even a lot of horror films hitting theaters. Big profile ones, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about films such as Poltergeist, Creepshow, The Thing.
Huge.
Halloween 3.
Not so huge.
But they were kind of, you know, still reasonable kind of franchises, weren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Sequel, Amityville 2, The Possession. My God. They were pumping out horror films.
But it just amazes me that this film was made on $4 million. But when you actually really think about it, when you actually look at the production values, it's not that surprising, is it?
No, not really. It's full of nobodies.
It's full of absolute nobodies that went on to do absolutely nothing. Like, it's the thing that's kind of amazed me about all these films that we've watched so far. All these teen movie stars in the early 80s, they never really went on to anything. So maybe, is it fair to say that there's like a Jason kind of curse a little bit? Like that it's kind of taints all the actors a little bit? What do you think?
Well, you know, that's as much as Friday the 13th has become beloved over the years.
Yeah.
I think at the time it was being made, it was just a job for the actors, you know. It's a successful franchise, and, you know, they kind of feel lucky to be in there. But really, it is probably just the filmmakers looking at the bottom line and going, do we really need to spend the money on getting a name for this movie?
Now, the original plan for the film actually involved Ginny, who was the actress Amy Steele from the previous film, where she was actually confined to a psychiatric hospital. Apparently, she was meant to be suffering from the trauma inflicted on her during the ordeal with Jason, and she eventually finds that, intent on revenge, he's actually tracked her down, and he begins to murder the staff and other patients at the hospital. Steele apparently ultimately declined the offer to return to the series, as she was actually busy with other projects during that period. But she's actually come out publicly saying that perhaps she should have accepted that role. And to be truthful, man, like, that would have been a reasonably interesting scenario. I would have liked to have seen Jason show up at the hospital and try and track down Ginny, because it's the one thing that I do feel like this franchise does suffer from just a little bit. Like, it's not a huge problem because you can still watch the films, but it does suffer from a little bit of consistency amongst the narrative a bit. Like, they're pretty happy to, like, just always introduce new characters, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. But, at the same time, need I point out that the plot of Halloween 2 was that Michael Myers tracks down Laurie Strode at the hospital and starts killing people there. So, as much as they were, like I said, on the coattails of the original Halloween, that's a little bit too much plagiarism going on there, as I say. Yeah. This is an interesting film by all accounts. This is the film where Jason gets his iconic hockey mask, right?
Yeah, I know. Well, I kept waiting for it to happen. It stunned me that it took 3 films to kind of get there, because
That's right.
we all kind of realize and understand the iconic nature of Jason as a horror villain, but it takes him 3 films. Like, in the first 2 films, he's just a mangled kind of mess, isn't he?
Yeah, well, obviously he wasn't the killer in the first one. The second one, he wears that sack on his head, but they do the same thing as they did in the first one, where you get a lot of the POV of the killer running around. So there's really no need to show Jason's face. So we know Jason's the killer. So what do? We put a mask on him.
Without kind of harping on it too much, don't you feel that the basic concept of the first Friday the 13th film, with Jason not being the killer, the subsequent films really suffer from that? Like, I so wish Jason was the killer in the first one, and because at least we'd kind of understand it. Because as much as it's fine, and I get the concept of, like, movie logic, and just the idea of just accepting stuff and watching it and not really thinking too much about it, it's kind of ridiculous that Jason is alive. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. It doesn't make sense. It's never really been fully explained.
Yeah, it's never really been fully explained. It very much feels like a bit of a cash-in from the producers. But as I said, sometimes you just got to accept stuff and you just watch it and you just get on with it, yeah?
Yeah, just let it roll.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you're dead right. This is the first film we see his hockey gear. Apparently, Martin J. Sadoff, who was the film's 3D effects supervisor, is actually responsible for coming up with Jason's trademark hockey mask. Apparently, he always kept a bag of full hockey gear on set because he was an avid hockey fan, and whilst he was testing potential masks to use for Jason, he actually pulled out a Detroit Red Wings goalie mask for the test. Apparently, director Steve Miner loved the look, and after making some modifications to the mask, decided to use it in the film. He's actually not the first guy to wear the hockey mask in the film. Doesn't Shelley wear it for a moment?
Exactly, yes. That's how it comes into Jason's possession. But I guess we'll talk about that in the discussion, right? So shall we get into the 3D-ness of this movie, the history behind that? Because, quite frankly, it's fascinating what they had to go through to get this film in theaters in 3D.
I mean, obviously, we'll get more into it as we discuss it, but this is very much a 3D film. Like if you are thinking about watching this movie, I highly recommend turning your 3D on your TV, finding a Blu-ray, and just letting it wash over you, because this is how this film is meant to be watched.
I know. If you didn't know this movie was supposed to be 3D, you would spend the entire movie going, what the hell are these people doing, and why is this framed? Every shot is framed in such a bizarre way.
Yeah, why is there a shot of popcorn, going crazy? Like, it's just... I would go as far as to say there's probably at least 30 occasions throughout the film that is clearly designed for you to kind of be immersed in the 3D technology. As I said, if you haven't seen this film and you're thinking of doing it, find a copy on Blu-ray, fire up your TV, and just enjoy it, because I think it would be a very different experience to my experience that I had a couple of nights ago, and yours as well. Have you actually ever seen it in 3D the way it's meant to be seen?
I have not, and apparently there are very few remaining original prints of the film in 3D. Of course, in the digital age, it has, they have made a digital 3D version of the film, so cinemas can get it. But as far as existing prints go, very rare. And like I said, I haven't bothered going with the Blu-ray 3D. I don't own a 3D TV, so no, I've never had the 3D experience.
But you did right. They actually needed an advertising gimmick to promote it, and now that the audiences have actually caught on to this new kind of fangled technology that actually wasn't really new at all. I mean, 3D technology has been around since the 50s, but it's the kind of thing that kind of comes and goes. But apparently there was a comedy western that came from Spain called Coming at You, and apparently it made a stunning, for the time, $12 million, mostly due to the novelty of its use of of 3D. And so Friday the 13th obviously needed something to kind of make it unique, and they decided to latch onto this technology and actually release the film like that. And it became the first Paramount film in 3D since 1956, as well as the first ever 3D film to receive a wide theatrical release from a major Hollywood studio. So the scarcity of the 3D equipped theaters actually complicated the matter, because it actually required the studio to make a bit of an investment in the release of this film as well, where they actually had to go around to the theaters and they actually like retrofit the cinemas so they could actually display this film, because it was kind of in their interest. Yeah, I mean, especially the fact that they made this film a year or 18 months before it was released, or whatever it was, or probably in this case probably 3 or 4 months. So they were pumping these films out pretty quickly, but it was clearly designed for 3D, so that they wanted to kind of make use of that technology as best they could.
Yeah, so they, and by they I mean Paramount, had access to what was called the Mark's 3D system, and like you said, it had to be retrofitted. All the lenses and everything had to go into the projectors, and they also had to invest money in around-the-clock support, a phone number that projectionists could call up if they had any issues, and get talked through any problems that they were having with the 3D. So huge investment by Paramount. From what I learned, it ended up going sideways because of a patenting issue. Apparently the inventor of it had issues or something like that, and they ended up having to recall the whole thing, and that's why there was no really big 3D boom in the 80s. It kind of started and then quickly died not too long afterwards. But it was a huge investment on their part, which didn't quite pay off.
Yeah, but you know what? This film did make a lot of money. As you say, it was made for $4 million and made $36 million. And I think I read somewhere in the trivia that they ended up spending roughly between $8 to $10 million on actually getting it into the theaters, like physically into the theaters. Because as you said, like they had to retrofit lenses and projectors and the expertise and whatnot, actually getting it in there. But you're right, it probably wasn't an enormous success, but it did okay for them too, didn't it?
Yeah, and the film kind of had to baby walk everybody through, what the deal was, how the glasses work and everything. Apparently, the original print actually starts with this little card that says, "Ladies and gentlemen, the first few minutes of this picture are not in 3D. However, you need the special 3D glasses anyway," because the film starts with the recap of the previous film.
Which is weird, I know, but that's okay. We spoke about that last week.
Yeah, obviously that's not going to be in 3D, so they do this recap, and then the 3D kicks in with the film regular. So, it was baby steps. And interestingly enough, the same thing happened with the movie Tron Legacy, which was a big 3D release when 3D became big around, 2009? Something like that.
Around that, give or take.
It had the same card at the beginning. The whole opening part of the film was in 2D, and it wasn't until they entered, the grid, the Tron world, that the film became 3D. So again, you kind of see that, baby steps, walking the audience through how it all works.
Now, apparently the focus on 3D was a reasonably complicated matter on set as well, because apparently the filmmakers were looking for essentially any excuse to use 3D. And this kind of went over to the actors, and apparently they were slightly frustrated because they weren't really focusing too much on interesting stuff like, character motivation or acting.
I know.
But they were finding cool 3D things for them to do, which frustrated them. So yeah, I could kind of understand their frustration, truthfully, because there doesn't look like a lot of direction kind of going on in this film, is there?
Because even just shooting 3D was difficult. Obviously, they would use 2 cameras on top of each other, and just the whole setup for it. Lighting scenes was very important. Things had to be significantly overlit, actually, so they could get everything they need and keep that focus. Because if you watch this film, you'll notice everything is in focus. The foreground, the midground, the background, the whole thing, it's always in focus.
I really felt sorry for the focus puller in that shot with the yo-yo, because you could see him working really hard to keep that in focus, and he was doing his job, but it was hard.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just it. It is. It's all this holding a pole up, or juggling, or popcorn, or yo-yos, just any reason to have this 3D going, which is a poor choice, because we'll get into it, but really the 3D should be in the kills and stuff like that. We talked about that in the first one. People come for the kills, and that's where they should have focused the 3D, and then spent the rest of the time, maybe focusing on character development and, God forbid, a little bit of acting.
Hey, let me ask you a question before we get into the main plot. Is Jason Voorhees a villain or a hero?
Well, he's a villain.
He's a villain.
He kills people for no reason, really.
But as you say, people are kind of going for the kills. They kind of want to see him kill people, don't they? I mean, like, is there any kind of expectation of Jason actually being killed himself as you're watching this?
Well, I guess we can talk about that in this film and how it ends. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting, almost like a moral dilemma in a way.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a moral, but it's also kind of like, what are my motivations when I'm watching this film? Because he's such a grotesque kind of character, isn't he?
He really is.
And they do, like, in the first few films, they really do try to kind of round him out a little bit. They've almost given up by this stage, though, haven't they?
Well, I don't know. They somewhat give him a little bit more of a backstory.
They do. Yeah, they do try. They really do try. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, before we get into the main discussion, I just wanted to point out this bit of trivia, and I did not even realize this until I read this bit of trivia online. In this movie, they never refer to Jason by name. Nobody says Jason, as if they don't know him or they'd never heard the legend, because in the second one, it seemed everybody knew the legend of Jason, but whatever.
It was like a thing in the first film. Well, sorry, the second one. Like, it was like a campfire kind of story, and people kind of debating whether it was real or not. And you know, no, Jason's not real. Don't think about that. Like those people that got killed at that camp, it was just an accident or something like that. They didn't really think of Jason. But this film, they literally do not mention it once at all.
Exactly. They rely on the audience to just know that it's Jason.
Apart from the fact that there is like a news report earlier in the film where they do refer to like a whole bunch of people being killed, but they don't say like about who or why, do they?
Exactly.
All right. Shall we get into the main plot discussion, Corey?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right. So getting into it, Friday the 13th, part 3.
You could almost, without giving too much away, as far as the timeline is concerned, it's basically like the next day.
It literally is.
It would actually be reasonably interesting watching part 2 and part 3 back to back, because they really do butt up against each other, don't they?
Okay, so we were talking last week about how, at least online, the fans have kind of done the work for us and worked out a timeline. So last week was not Friday the 13th at all. It was the lead up to Friday the 13th. And this film takes place on Friday the 13th. So last week it was Tuesday the 10th through Thursday the 12th, and then we pick up on the evening of Thursday the 12th with the opening, and then the majority of the film takes place over Friday the 13th. So take that for what it is.
Yeah, I know. Strange, but that's okay. I mean, you just, as I said, you just accept these things, and that's kind of that. I mean, I kind of think Friday the 13th is more of a brand than an actual like time stamp on these films.
The logic I found behind it is that apparently Chris mentions in dialogue that they're having a weekend out at the cabin, so that's why people think this is now Friday the 13th.
Okay, alright, fair enough. So, as we said, following the events of the previous film, a seriously injured Jason Voorhees shows up out of nowhere on this weird kind of lakefront store, and we actually get introduced to the strangest characters in the 3 films that we've watched so far, in my opinion, were these 2 people, Harold and Edna.
Yeah.
Now, Edna is a tired, you know, without being stereotypical too much, but a tired kind of wife, always barking at her husband about not bringing in the washing and doing all the chores, and why he won't listen to the doctor's advice and lose weight, and apparently he keeps sneaking snacks and doing all kinds of things, and like she's kind of berating him all the time, isn't he? Isn't she, I should say.
Yeah. It's so bizarre. I mean, these 2, they're just minding their own business. Before this, Pamela Voorhees was, you know, killing camp counselors because they're going to reopen the camp. Jason kind of followed suit with that. These 2 don't meet any of the criteria. It's just like, Jason's been on a murder spree, so here's 2 more people for him to kill.
And he keeps kind of appearing like at the clothesline, like behind clothes, and like there's a couple of scenes where like Harold is kind of outside and you could tell Jason's kind of in the distance, and then for whatever reason Harold decides to come into the store, and it's like a fruit and veg like corner store. Mm-hmm. There's even a scene of Harold going to the toilet.
I know.
Which I thought was just like, really?
It's like they thought it was such a cool idea to have this snake jump out of his rabbit cages, right?
Oh,
He's
that's
keeping
right.
rabbits,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, and this snake jumps out and frightens him so much that he has to run inside and take a shit.
Yeah, that's exactly. And like he doesn't just take a shit. They do the sound effects of him like struggling on the toilet, and it's disgusting. It's disgusting, man. It irked me out just a little bit, yeah.
I don't get it, yeah. But you're right. Jason is just sleuthing around. He's a super sleuth now. Can't hear him. He's just lurking around, hiding in the background, hiding behind laundry, hiding behind windows.
And I kind of get the impression I've read in the synopsis that he was there to steal clothes. Did you get that impression?
Well, he got quite bloodied up in that last one, right? He took the machete to his shoulder and stuff. So, yeah, later on, he doesn't have that. So, presumably, he stole some clothes from Harold Ned's place.
But it is something that kind of always struck me about Jason. He's quite well dressed for a homicidal maniac, isn't he?
But, a couple of interesting kills, he gets Harold with a meat cleaver. And then, of course, Edna, with the rollers in her hair, goes out looking for him. And she gets a knitting needle in the back of her head. I mean, you think it's going to come from the front because she opens this they're like drawers or something in the garage. They have like a curtain over them, and there's this big pole sticking out of it. And you think, oh, he's going to come up and like whack her head into it. But then he comes up, grabs her, and puts one of her knitting needles through the back of her head. You're like, that's a bit odd.
It is pretty gross, but it all happens pretty quickly, doesn't it?
And I mean, they're pushing the 3D too. I mean, from the get-go.
Oh my lord!
He's picking up the pole to put the washing line back up or something, and he's holding it like right at the screen. And like I said, there's that pole sticking out of the benches there or whatever it is. Like, there's all kinds of stuff just poking out.
Keep in mind, before all this kind of happens, Edna is sitting on the couch and she's watching TV, and they're telling about like a murder spree just happened, and she kind of gets a bit irked out because she realizes that it actually all happened like within 5 minutes of where she lives. So she kind of thought maybe something could be up, maybe I should kind of be a bit careful at the moment. But Jason's just too fast, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And, after this kill happens, we get our opening title sequence with the most random music, but obviously a title sequence made for 3D. It's like a rip-off of the Superman opening credits, right? Where they're all like pushing out right at you. You could tell with the 3D what it was supposed to be doing. But I don't know, it's just such a bizarre bit of music while all this is going on.
After Jason kills Edna and Harold, we meet this random kind of group of friends. Chris Higgins and her friends travel to her old house on Crystal Lake to have like a weekend away. And the gang actually includes a pregnant woman randomly called Debbie. And when she first mentioned that she was pregnant, I thought she was joking, but she repeats it. And then it actually confirms that she's pregnant.
Yeah, it really does. She's definitely pregnant. She doesn't want to do drugs in the car and all that stuff. So yeah, she's definitely pregnant in this thing. It's a weird setup, it's just this group of friends. And I think it's, just in the dialogue here at the beginning, Andy is roommates at college with Shelley. And Shelley's a bit awkward, right? And they're kind of setting him up with this friend of theirs named Vera for the weekend. And they're going off to the cabin to have a good old time. And might I mention, still not back at Camp Crystal Lake. We're now going to a place called Higgins Haven, which I guess is named after Chris's family, her name being Chris Higgins. So I guess we're still on the lake. We're just still further away from the lake.
Yeah.
It's like we're moving our way along the lake in each installment.
I've got to talk about Shelley just for a minute because I'm dying to talk about him. He is hilarious in this film, and like hilarious in not the right way. He's really sad. Like he's like this sad character that doesn't really have like a very high opinion of himself, and he thinks he's ugly and a bit fat or whatever it might be, and he's like, you've got all the charms and I've got nothing, like that kind of attitude. And he's got this really strange kind of characteristic where he feels the need to be like a really weird kind of practical joker, because he feels like if he doesn't do the practical jokes, then what else does he have? Because he's not good looking. Like, he needs to be the funny guy in the group, you know? And he's this really strange character. I thought he was, anyway.
Yeah, you kind of get everything you need to know about Shelley in his opening scene, where he's lurking at them wearing this mask, carrying a fake knife.
Yeah, that's
and he
right.
sort of, gets the drop on them, and they're like, "Oh, Jesus, Shelley, what are you doing?" And then they're like, "Oh, take that stupid mask off." And he goes, would you not want to wear a mask if you had a face like this? And you're like, geez, like, this dude is like sad and pathetic, and yeah, he always just feels like he has to make jokes and annoy people.
He's not the only person we meet. He's on a blind date with Vera, who clearly does not reciprocate the feelings for Shelley. And we also meet these two weird stoners that are inspired by the whole Cheech and Chong kind of thing. Did you get that impression?
I did. And I mean, what are these people? Like 10, 15 years older than everybody else? Chuck and Chili.
Yeah, that's it. I know they're like in their 40s at least.
And they're just smoking it up. They like turn around, they're like, "Oh my god, the van's on fire," and they run over. Now Chuck and Chili are just getting high.
Yeah, they're sitting in the back and they're smoking these ginormous bongs. And then they do this another gag when they're driving away with the van, right? And police sirens show up behind the van and they're driving along and they freak out because they're convinced that the police want the van to pull over. So they start like eating their stash and stuff and throwing it out the window and doing whatever they need to do to not incriminate themselves.
Yeah, but Debbie won't do it because she's pregnant.
Yeah,
Just reiterate there.
That's right. But it turns out that the police did not want these guys and just drive straight past them with the sirens blaring.
They were heading off to the grocers, because I guess the bodies of Harold and Edna were found.
So once again, we've established our, for use of a better term, Corey, but disposable set of teenagers, sex-crazed teenagers, who are essentially just fodder for Jason.
Well, these guys aren't even going to get killed until later, because we do yet another setup. After we meet all these people, Chris has this boyfriend who I guess she hooks up with whenever her and her family are on holiday out there, named Rick.
Is that the guy that owns the VW?
Yeah.
The car? Yeah.
And he's always wearing like sweater vests and stuff,
Yeah,
like ridiculously good looking. And he seems content to think that Chris is his girlfriend, even though it seems they only ever see each other like once a year. And at this point, haven't seen each other for like 2 years, because Chris is going to get in this whole thing about how she was attacked by Jason 2 years ago and hasn't been back since. Anyway, we set up Rick, and then we go into town and get even more setup of more characters. This random biker gang, Fox, Loco, and Ali.
Keep in mind, Shelley and Vera are in this kind of scene. And before they go into town, Vera goes to take the VW to go and get some supplies or something like that. And Shelley has just played this really ridiculous practical joke.
Oh, yeah.
And he almost kind of gets in trouble about it. Like everyone's a bit pissed off with him, and he's just like, it's just ridiculous. They're the most stupid.
He rolls out of a cupboard with an axe in his head. Like, what an idiot.
And doesn't he set it up as well? Like earlier on in the film, like he's got this bag, and they say, "What's in the bag, Shelley?" And he goes, "You'll see," or something.
Yeah, my whole life is in here. Stick around, you'll see.
Yeah, exactly. So it's clearly all these really bad gags. So anyway, he's pissed off Vera, who goes to run away in the car, but after essentially begging her to get out of the camp for a bit, she stops and takes Shelley along with her. In hindsight, she probably should have just gone by herself and just did what she had to do, then come back. But she took Shelley along for the ride, because when they get to this convenience stores, they have this confrontation with these random 3 80s bikers, named Ali, Loco, and Fox. And they're kind of throughout the film, aren't they, essentially?
It's such a weird scene because, again, they get with this 3D where Vera's like, "Hey, Shelley, I need some money." So he throws his wallet, like, right at the screen.
That's exactly right.
And it lands on the floor, and Fox comes up and does this whole, like, "You could ask me nicely if you want to have this back. Is this your rubber in here? You're so rude," all this blah, blah, blah. But it's quite the run-in with them. And then Shelley, while they're leaving, backs the VW into their bikes and really pisses them off.
I know. So they get into this kind of confrontation and all this kind of stuff happens, and it essentially ends with Shelley driving over one of the motorcycles and then drives away. But that, of course, inspires these bikers to kind of get their own kind of revenge, doesn't it?
They empty out the gas tank, siphon out all the fuel, setting up, the trucks are not going to work anymore.
Which is really irritating because you wanted that girl to get away later in the film, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, because even though we're on a lake in New Jersey, for some reason, Chris's father has a barn there.
Yeah, I know.
It's not a freaking farm. She has some throwaway line about how he's always wanted to get a horse and every year buys hay to put in the barn, but they just never buy a horse.
This leaves Jason a very convenient kind of hiding place. So apparently he goes there to recover from his injuries. Not that I ever really think of Jason actually getting injured, because there's several times in the previous two films where he's been like stabbed or like his leg's been injured, and it doesn't really seem to bother him that much, does it?
No, not at all.
He always kind of keeps kind of moving forward, which has always given me the impression, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, mate, but is Jason supernatural, or is he it's hard to say, isn't it?
Well, people say the same thing about Michael Myers, just being that he is a relentless killer. Inherently, we're going to imbue some sort of supernatural force on him, right?
But that's what I always kind of feel like about Jason. He just has this relentless need to kill everything that's like in his sight. Like he has no empathy or sympathy, or he doesn't let anyone go. Like if you're in front of him, he's going to kill you, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly right. So yeah, he's hiding out in the barn. Fox and Loco end up going in there and they get killed. Fox gets the pitchfork through her throat, and they really dwell on that kill. Like they were so proud of how it was set up. She's speared through the neck, but she's like hanging from this pillar across the roof, right? And they kind of pan down to show you she's not being suspended by anything, so she must really be pitchforked up there through the neck.
And they did it really, it was a slow pan as well to really show that there was like she wasn't standing on anything,
And it looked good, don't get me wrong, it looked really good. But they really showed it off.
And we also get Loco as well, that is impaled through the stomach with a pitchfork, which is pretty gross, but it all happens pretty quickly.
Yeah, and at this point it's kind of left ambiguous what happens to Ali, but that's going to come back later. So that's kind of, just whetting your appetite a bit. These 80s bikers are all taken out. Before we get into the night killing of our main group, shall we play some clips from the this first half?
Let's do it.
So I've got a little snippet of that opening music. How do you like this?
Nice.
Are you creeped out?
There was a part of me that was kind of dancing a little bit, I was moving a bit.
It's got a bit disco in there, right?
Total disco. It's good.
All right, I've got a bit of Harold. This one I've entitled Dayfly Eggs.
Dayfly eggs.
For some reason, he eats the fish food, if you remember. I was like, that's just so weird.
I totally forgot about that. That's crazy.
Okay, we got the cops coming in.
Oh, yeah.
It's the cops.
Oh my God.
What? They're catching us. Hard.
What are we gonna do?
Destroy the evidence. Hurry.
No way, man. Let's go, Chuck. Come on.
They're gaining on us.
Throw it out.
No, they'll see it. Hurry.
You gotta get rid of it. Eat it. Sean, the cops are gonna get us. We're going to jail.
I'm driving.
No way. We're pregnant, remember?
I'm pregnant, remember?
Oh, my Lord. That's crazy. They're so desperate to kind of get rid of their stash, aren't they?
Oh, my God. It's too good.
Just quickly, whilst I think about it, do they ever explain where Chili and the other person kind of come from? Like, how are they connected to this group?
I don't know. No explanation. They're just hanging out with these teenagers.
They're just hanging out, aren't they? It's weird.
Getting high, going out to the cabin.
I know. Anyway, what's the next one?
All right, so we have a bit of a run-in with the biker gang here at the grocery store.
Oh, yeah, nice.
I'll take that now.
Is this your rubber? Didn't your mama teach you manners? If you want something, you ask. Nice.
Nice.
Oh, she's so nasty to them.
Wasn't that the intro music being recycled?
Yes, played on like the radio in the background.
Yeah, nice.
All right, so night falls over at Higgins Haven, and it's pretty much like everybody is off doing their own thing, right? Deborah and Andy go upstairs to have sex. Rick and Chris go off to have. She's going to tell him about the encounter she had 2 years ago with Jason.
I forgot the encounter. We haven't spoken about that yet, man, because you get the impression she's got a history, doesn't she?
Yeah, so apparently 2 years ago, she had a run-in with Jason. She had an argument with her parents there at Higgins Haven, ran off into the woods, and fell asleep under a tree. When she woke up, there was Jason with a knife.
She's clearly, like, having trouble on a relationship kind of level, too. Like things aren't rosy in their world, are they?
No. I think it stems from the fact that she took off 2 years ago, and he has had no contact with her, and this is the first time she's explaining what happened to him.
Yeah.
So yeah, they do this whole thing where she's telling the story, and she's, the scene of her being attacked is superimposed over her face as she's telling it. It's a weird sequence. Not to mention the fact that they're sitting like right next to what looks like some sort of sewage pipe trickling out water and stuff. I don't know how romantic that is, but whatever.
I think the car kind of gets back during that sequence as well. And Shelley and Vera are really like casual about it. They're just like, oh yeah, we damaged the car. Like Shelley's almost proud of the fact that he kind of, got revenge on these bikers, more so than actually damaging the car and actually hurting someone else's property. To be truthful, Shelley's a bit of a dick.
Yeah, he's just like, I'll buff it out, it'll be fine.
Yeah, it'll be fine. There's no problem there. Yeah, I know.
At the end of the day, he is left alone with Vera, and he tries to, pour his heart out to her, saying like, we've got to know each other, and this is kind of nice. And she
I like
cuts
you.
him off.
Yeah, exactly.
She's like, not gonna happen.
And then doesn't she say something like, I've got to go. I'm gonna go for a walk, but when I get back, we can have a talk.
Friend zone.
Yeah, exactly. So it is what it is, man.
Yeah. So she's sitting out on the dock, and Shelley pulls another one of his stupid tricks coming up out of the water at her. For some reason, he's put on a wetsuit and a hockey mask to do this. And she gets pissed at him. And she's sitting there, he storms off. And she's sitting there, and Shelley goes into the barn, right? And I guess that's where he gets attacked by Jason, who steals the hockey mask from him, comes out of the barn wearing it with this spear gun. And like he's a freaking dead shot, hits her right in the eye with it.
I know. To be truthful, it was probably the best kill in the film. I thought, like, I'm not a big guy that glorifies the kills, but I thought the spear gun in the eye at Vera was fairly impressive.
Yeah, it's not bad. I actually think the best kill of this movie comes next. Andy and Deb finish having their sex up in the hammock.
How do you have sex in the hammock again? I'm sure we'll work it out.
She's having a shower. He's, for some reason, walking around on his hands.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about the guy that walks
Jason
his hands.
Slices him right down the taint.
Oh, my God. And it's a really graphic kill because he's walking on his hands, and then the camera kind of pans up and there's the hockey mask. And all you get is this like knife that just comes straight down, yeah?
Oh man, it's so well shot, so well choreographed. I mean, as far as kills go, I think that's one of the best. And then later, I mean, because Deb gets it next, they do the Kevin Bacon kill pretty much from the first one, right? Except it's a machete this time instead of an arrow. And she gets killed. But before she gets killed, she looks up and sees his like mutilated, cut in half corpse up in the rafters.
Because out of nowhere, she reads a Fangoria. She pulls out a magazine of Fangoria and she's flipping through it casually like she's some fan. I mean, I suppose it's not impossible that she could be a fan, and she actually opens up an article all about visual effects maestro Tom Savini.
Yeah. She flicks past like a Godzilla page as well.
Yeah, exactly, which just kind of made me giggle because obviously that's a bit of an in-joke, yeah.
It really is. But at the same time, it's so rough. I mean, they made such a big deal that she was pregnant, and now she's just, we've just watched her get killed, and you're just like, somehow it's worse. Like, did they do this intentionally to make it seem worse?
Yeah, I know. But this is all happening and the power kind of goes out too, doesn't it?
That's right. So we're down to Chuck and Chili left in the cabin because Rick and Chris are still away, right? And yeah, the power goes out, so Chuck goes to investigate. Shelly stumbles in with his sliced neck, and of course Chili just thinks
it's a joke.
Playing a joke again.
Yeah. To boost his self-confidence.
But she quickly realizes that, like, everybody's dead and does some of the worst acting in this movie. She's running around going, "Oh my God, oh my God." Oh, so terrible.
You're right. Chili sends Chuck down to the basement where Jason actually hurls Chuck into the fuse box, electrocuting him to death and severing the power. And then Jason actually then goes on to murder Chili on the main floor with a fire poker.
Should I point out too that we also get another delightful scene of somebody using the toilet?
Oh yes.
Chuck goes in to use the toilet and someone's shaking it, presumably Jason or something, and just like that kind of went nowhere.
I know, it's strange, but we also, after this kind of all happens, Chris actually tells Rick, which we mentioned before, about how she was attacked by a disfigured man a couple of years earlier, causing her to leave Crystal Lake in order to escape the trauma. And Rick's car dies and they're actually forced to walk back to the Haven, which they find in disarray. Rick steps outside to search the grounds and Jason grabs him and actually crushes his skull with his bare hands.
Another 3D moment of that eyeball popping out, right?
Yeah, it actually freaked me out a little bit when that happened. I wasn't expecting the eyeball to come out, but I suppose I should be prepared for almost anything in these films at the moment.
Speaking of eyeballs, actually, if we may backtrack for a second, I forgot to mention the poor man's Crazy Ralph that they run into right at the beginning of the film, who's just waving around a human eyeball for some reason.
Yeah, they're driving along in the van and there's this guy like in the middle of the road or something there, and they stop and talk to him, don't they?
Yeah, because they nearly run him down. And he's just like, "I'm warning you, don't go out there. You've been warned." I'm like, that's just poor man's Crazy Ralph.
I really wish they kept Crazy Ralph around because, again, we talk about consistency in the series, and I really do feel, Corey, that this is a film series that could have really been enhanced by a little bit more kind of patient, relaxed kind of filmmaking a bit, that maybe did try to think about story a little bit more as opposed to just offing, 7 or 8 teenagers, that they just cast the last week. And it suffers a bit from not having characters like Crazy Ralph around, and maybe a little bit of continuity from the previous films. I mean, even in the second film, they only brought back the character from the first film only for about 5 minutes at the start, killed her off really quickly, and then got into it with a new set of characters. Well, they're just doing the same with this one. It'll be interesting to see how the series moves forward, but to be truthful, I'm not expecting things to change all that much.
Right, because we just get really just an extended chase scene here at the end. Jason, it starts off with Chris being startled by doors flying and open and windows flying open, because at the very least it's not raining this time, but there is just a hell of a lot of wind going on. And she's just chased by Jason and they end up in the barn. They run into Ali in there. Who's not dead. He just sort of comes out of nowhere to attack Jason, gets his arm cut off, and then he's like, I think he's like hacked to death. Like, Jason just lays into him.
There's no mucking about with Ali, unfortunately. So I'm not too sure why they kept him alive, just so they could kill him again, but that's okay. But the distraction actually allows Chris to take an action strike Jason in the head, who apparently only staggers momentarily before actually collapsing.
Well, this is going back to that like superhuman thing you were talking about. She hangs him actually from the barn originally, goes down, there he is, and then he pulls himself up off of the noose. At which point she has to hack him in the head with the machete.
We end up with him being stuck with the head and he collapses. Chris escapes the barn and somehow finds a canoe and actually goes out into the lake and falls asleep. And let me just say, Corey, this is when the film gets weird.
Okay, yeah. This is a redo of the previous one, right?
Are you with me on this one?
Yeah.
It's weird.
Okay. So the end of the first one we said was just absolutely a bizarre thing to do. Have child Jason come up out of the lake and attack her. This time, who's attacking but Mrs. Voorhees? Somehow she's reattached her head and become a freaking lake zombie to attack her.
If I remember rightly too, doesn't Chris wake up from the canoe and sees that Jason is still alive in the barn?
Oh,
and,
that's
and,
right.
and Jason kind of like stares at her and like really like insistently tries to kind of get to her. And then out of nowhere, a decomposing body of Pamela Voorhees lunges from the lake and pulls her in. That is essentially where we finish the film, yeah?
Yeah. It's kind of left ambiguous, just like the first one, really. It's just like, did she dream that? Well, I guess maybe she dreamed the whole thing with Jason waking back up and coming at her because he like knocks a door down or something, and then she looks back and it's not like that anymore.
But the very final shot, because I mean, the police actually arrive and escort the disturbed Chris away from Higgins Haven. So once again, we have a female being the sole survivor of a Jason attack. So will Chris survive the next film? Maybe. I wonder if there's like a Jason supporters group out there of the people that actually survive. Because you know what, there are a few survivors that we maybe towards the end of the series will come up with a list of people that survived Jason, and because there's a few, there'd be a funny list to kind of put together. But right at the end, after she gets taken away, we cut back to the lake. There's a shot of the canoe, if I remember rightly, but you see like a bubble of some description come from the lake,
Like a ripple.
like an air, like an air bubble or something like that, and it kind of gives you the impression that there's something beneath the lake.
Yeah, that's kind of what I took from it too.
So
Weird ending. So, shall we check out some clips from the second half?
let's do it.
All right, so I've got a bit of Chuck and Chili here.
Oh, nice.
Did I hear you screaming?
Oh, it's probably Debbie having an orgasm. How come you never scream when we have sex?
Give me something to scream about.
Oh my god.
I love the, two people upstairs have just been hacked to death. I'm like, oh, did I hear you screaming? No, she's probably having an orgasm.
As much as they're horror films, they do try and make them a bit funny too, don't they?
Just a little bit.
Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
I've got some Chili's bad acting.
Nice.
Oh my god! Oh
my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. I think I liked your impersonation slightly better earlier on in the show, but that's all right.
I've got the part where Ali jumps out, and if you listen closely, he actually calls Jason a motherfucking psycho.
The thing that's amusing about that is that Ali's trying to be really gallant and like sacrifice himself so the girl can kind of get away, and he does a really bad job, but that's okay.
He's been hiding in there all day, waiting for his opportunity.
I know.
All right, last one here. I've got that cop at the end, which I thought he was weird.
Yeah, looks like she's the only one left alive.
What was all that about a lady in the lake?
She must have flipped out. That poor kid's been through hell.
Oh, yeah.
She must have flipped out.
Man, they need to come up with some new ideas. Didn't we do this 2 films ago? She must have been through hell. Oh, my God. It's very funny.
All right. So, ratings recommend. What do you think?
I'm going to let you go first on this one, Corey.
Okay.
What's your ratings and recommends?
Okay. So, yeah, this movie isn't terribly well acted. It's still very derivative of the 2 previous ones we've already seen. But you know what? I like this movie. I think it's a bit of fun. I think the kills are fun. And, yeah, I enjoy it. I'm going to give this one a recommend. I'm going to say, let's say 7 day fly eggs out of 10.
Wow, 7. See, for me personally, I think if I had to be brutally honest, it's probably hovering around the 5 mark for me. Probably 5 hockey masks out of 10. It's a fun film. Not too sure if I can recommend it. It's probably my least favorite of the 3. But I think it's only because the acting and the story just wasn't quite as strong. Like, I genuinely enjoyed the second film. I thought it was quite interesting, and I liked the filmmaking, and I got to know the characters a little bit more. I don't really feel like I got to know the characters quite as well in this one, hence why I'm giving it like a slightly lower rating. The first film was unique because it's the first, it's the original. The second one was interesting because it was a slightly different take, but the filmmaking was slightly better. I was just a bit disappointed with this one, simply be because it was the same filmmaker as the second film, but I feel like they got a bit distracted with the whole 3D thing. I would have been interested to see this film without that distraction, to see if it actually improved the filmmaking side of things. But that's just me. Like, I'm not saying avoid it. It's part of the series. It's not awful. You'll get some laughs out of it, and I certainly got some laughs out of it. But I just don't think it's quite as strong as the second one, and the first one was a bit of a better experience for me.
All right, so next week we'll be...
Oh, wait, sorry, I just read something. It says we're watching Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Is this correct?
That's right. This is the last one of the series. Yeah, it's not even called Part 4. It's just called Friday the 13th, the final chapter.
Something I actually forgot to mention during our discussion is the 80s was creeping in big time in this film, probably much more so in this film than it was in the first and the second one. So I can only imagine what the fourth one in 1984 is going to show us. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. You're going to like it. From that aesthetic, anyway. All right, so guys, for more great podcasts from Golden Spiral Media, head over to goldenspiralmedia.com/Apple. You can join us on Facebook. We're at facebook.com/rewatchpodcast and on Twitter at rewatchpod. Also, your rate and review is always appreciated on your podcast app of choice. Really helps out our show. All right, Nathan. Thank you for joining me as always. Great discussion.
And I look forward to coming back for part 4 next week.
So I will just say, until next time, I'm not an asshole, I'm an actor.
You son of a bitch. Come back here, you bastards. You ain't getting away with this. God damn it.
Golden Spiral Media and the Rewatch podcast are not associated with the copyright holders of these films, and no copyright infringement is intended.
They were making love while that young boy drowned.
The use of any and all copyrighted material is solely for parody, news analysis, critique, or educational purposes, as provided in United States Code Title 17, aka Fair Use.
It's gonna take more than a poke in the ribs to put down this old dog.
Music provided by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com.
Cool, JJ. Parents really came through.
Copyright 2017, Golden Spiral Media.
You a dead meat slime bag.